Today, we're doing one of our People and Projects episodes, and I'm here with Ruth Rosas from America Walks as part of the Week Without Driving. I'm on Gubby Gubby country in Queensland. I know you only because I heard about Anna Zivet's project, The Week Without Driving, earlier on this year, and having been doing Get Around Cabo Car Free, I thought, yeah, this is absolutely perfect for us because the problem that people don't realize is what do you do when you can't drive, actually? And it's not about saying you shouldn't drive. It's about saying, well, how can we provide some more options? That's what we're all about. When I saw that project, I thought, yes, I want to see if we can bring that here and give it a go. And so that's how I know you. Perhaps, Ruth, you could say where you're calling from and what made you interested in America Walks, the Week Without Driving. And yeah, well, let's just take it from there.
My name is Ruth. I'm from Chicago, which is Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi nations. We are involved in Week Without Driving since last year. It was our first year going national. We are co-organizing with Anna Zivars from Disability Rights Washington. I've been involved in mobility work for a while, since 2010, 2011. I got involved because growing up, I was in a very car-centric small town in Midwest Illinois in the US. If you didn't have a car, it was really hard to get around. As soon as you turn 15, you're learning how to drive. At 16, you're getting your driver's license. That was a really big challenge for my family. It was really hard to get to school. I had to walk pretty far to get to school. Then when I got to high school, I had to carpool or find ways to get home. That presented a lot of issues that I had never really thought about. My small community did not have public transit. If you didn't have a car, you had to walk around or bike or carpool, get rides from someone. When I got to university, I went to school in Chicago. Chicago was the first place that I had ever lived in that had a really robust public transit system that really opened up my eyes to a different kind of world. In the US, when you go to a university, they usually give you a public transit pass and you can get on any bus or any train, any form of public transit for free. And I remember that first day when I got my pass for public transit and feeling like the world had opened up to me because I didn't have to rely on a car or rely on a ride, but I could get anywhere for free. And I thought that was amazing. And it inspired me to go into this work and think about mobility in a very different way. I've been car free since I left my small town. I haven't owned a car. It's been, to me, really liberating. I felt very free not having to worry about a car. In my work in mobility, I've definitely focused on alternative modes of transportation. So when I joined America Walks, I started organizing with Week Without Driving, and it was a perfect segue into my own life story and the struggles of living in a very car-dependent community where I didn't have a lot of options. And then knowing that there is a different way to live and we can build communities that are very robust in alternative modes of transportation for people who can't drive, who cannot afford to drive, maybe prefer to not drive. This is how I came into this mobility space and why I'm organizing with Week Without Driving.
In Australia, we have discount travel passes for people going to university. Actually, it's really poor and it's very variable. In Queensland, where we are, just this week, we started the 50-cent fares for 6 months to see if that made a difference. So that's going to be really interesting to see the long-term outcomes of that and whether that sees a transition and how people understand train travel and bus travel. I was curious, what were you studying at university?
I went to the University of Illinois at Chicago and I had been studying architecture, which is very related to urbanism. When I was in architecture, even though I really liked design, I was always really cognizant of buildings, whether it be like a big public building or be like a private building, like a house, where it was being built, realizing that everything had context, right? Like when you're younger, you're in this context because your parents are there or your caretakers are there and you don't particularly have a say. And as you get older, you start to realize there are different places to live, different ways, and you have more of a choice of if you want to live in a place that is maybe more rural or maybe more suburban or more urban. When I got to Chicago, because it was so different than my very small rural town, I really thought about the way the streets were designed and, if buses or there was a train station nearby. Architecture kind of helped me think about design of places in that way. way, but I was definitely much more interested in that social aspect of the way we design cities and particularly the way we move around cities.
What I've come to see is how much the urban environment actually determines your behavior. It's not like you're behaving without the context of the urban environment. It's the urban environment that helps shift the way that you move and you do things, and also to think about where you live. If you live in a place where you have lots of buildings that are maybe deteriorating and a footpath that may or may not be wide enough or broken, or it goes for a short time but then it stops magically because whatever the funding ran out, or it was outside my jurisdiction, or the driveway has priority over the footpath. The other day I was thinking, as I walk along the footpath, the driveway has precedence over the place that people walk on, and you can't easily differentiate between the footpath and the driveway. And it's no wonder that people think, well, it's my driveway, why can't I park across it? Because actually that's how we've created the physical space. So I think that's what you're sort of also pointing to. Does that sound right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Now you're involved with Week Without Driving at America Walks. What else does America Walks do aside from the Week Without Driving?
America Walks, it's been over 20 years and it definitely has focused on the aspect of walking or rolling as a primary mode of transportation, but it also has really focused on that third space, not the place where you are working or the place where you live, but the places that you go to congregate or to be with other people. And the fact that streets are that third place. Maybe you see somebody, a friend on the street, or there's something, a business on the street that you really like to frequent, and those become places that we visit. Through that work, we've focused on a few campaigns, one of them, Week Without Driving. We have a couple of other ones. The other one that I am helping lead is Freedom to Move. It's particularly about decriminalizing jaywalking. The reason why is because in the US, jaywalking, it hasn't really been a safety measure for people, but as a way to find specific people or that don't really prioritize the safety of individuals, because jaywalking was seen as a way to mitigate risks of crashes, especially deadly crashes or crashes that injure people. It hasn't been so much on the design of a street, making streets that are lower speed or putting in more pedestrian friendly infrastructure that allows people to cross more easily, things like that. So we really help communities who are interested in decriminalizing jaywalking or getting rid of jaywalking laws in their communities to figure out ways to do that. There are a few other organizations that also focus on that. So we've been partnering with them. We definitely do focus on the equity part of jaywalking laws because we want to make sure that everybody lives in a community that is safe to walk or roll in. That's a big basis of that. There's a couple of other ones that we focus on. One of them, reconnecting communities or communities over highways. In the US, our highway system was built through communities. So it's about reunification of those communities that were divided by highways. There's been a lot of projects in the US that have taken off trying to get rid of those big highways that separate communities from each other, but also create divisions that are not only racial and social and economic, but also prevent people from getting to places or make it really hard to cross those highways or really dangerous also. We also have programs. We run the National Walking College. The National Walking College is a 6-month program where people, individuals, whether it be advocates or people who are working in mobility spaces or tangentially maybe in public health, they join this program and they learn basically everything that has to do with mobility. So we start off with the ways that walking was designed in communities in the US. It does particularly focus on the US. And then just the laws around that, the different elements that have come out of that, urban planning aspects. Fellows, we call them fellows, who are part of this program, go on to make a plan or a project, some place in their community that they want to improve. It could be that they want to improve the infrastructure, or they want to create some social event, or they want to do a little bit more advocacy work to change a policy in their community, a variety of those things. And we help them think through the ways to do that. And so this program helps people learn how to connect with their decision makers, these lawmakers in their communities, and different aspects and avenues that they can take to create those changes in their community. After that, we still stay in touch with them. We also have some small grants that they can apply for. And these small grants basically go to aid some of this work that we're talking about. We're kind of all encompassing of various different things. We also do some technical assistance with communities who want to better their accessibility to walkable, accessible places. So we do walk audits or teach them how to think about approaching their decision maker in their community. There's a variety of things that we do. We're actually focused on a lot of other things and we have a lot of partners, but that's kind of a broad stroke of the work that we do.
With the National Walking College, because I thought, oh, that sounds really cool. Is there a fee that goes with that, or do you have a sliding scale? If so, or how does that work?
For the National Walking College, people apply to be in it. Then we have an organizer who does all of the work, and we only accept, I believe, about 20 fellows every year, but they don't pay to do any of this course. It's all free. We do it once a year. Every year, there's a whole new walking college fellowship. The program is split up into modules, and it takes about 5 to 10 hours per week. It's a variety of things of discussions, readings, writing assignments, but it's done through an application process.
As you said, it's a college, it's a university, it's a proper course that you have to apply for, you have to have time for. It sounds like a lot of the assessment would be how much time do you have, how much experience do you have, what's the project you're thinking of doing. So it sounds like in the application there would be quite a lot of filtering, so you wouldn't get people going, oh yeah, I'll do that, and then you've lost that space because they come to a couple of sessions and then they're gone. Well, let's talk a little bit more about the Week Without Driving. Tell me how it works in the US. Our focus is about raising awareness with politicians and business people and also the general community. But we also do other things about how can you improve your infrastructure and also what it's like to walk around your neighborhood. You can actually start to shift things. What is the focus? Maybe describe the Week Without Driving from your perspective and what Anna Zivit's, her original intention was and where it's going to, because it started in 2021. A little bit more about the origin and the development of it and the focus.
The Week Without Driving started in 2021 with Anna Zevar as the director of the Disability Mobility Initiative at Disability Rights Washington. This was created because Anna is a low vision advocate. She was born with a neurological condition, and so she's never been able to drive. And she realized that there's a lot of people like this in her own community, and about a third of Americans also are not able to drive. Because of this, she wanted to kind of hear the stories of different people in her community that were also what she coined as involuntary non-drivers. So these are people who are not choosing not to drive, but they cannot physically drive. And so she wanted to hear their stories and hear what their lives were, these different barriers and gaps that they were experiencing in the community every day to get around, whether it be a medical appointment or to do groceries, etc. And so they created a story map of these different places across Washington. After they did this, she thought there's a good way to bring this to people's daily life. Firsthand experience is such a great way to learn. It's not something that you just hear about, but it's something that you experience and it makes a big impact. And so she came up with the Week Without Driving as a way to focus these involuntary non-drivers. So people who either have disabilities or young people who don't have a driver's license. Seniors are people who have aged out of driving or people who cannot afford cars or gas. To hear their stories, but also put people, especially our decision makers, in their shoes and try not to drive for 1 week so that decision makers can experience what it's like to live in that community. Because we know that there's a lot of communities that are very car dependent. There are not very many choices for people who don't drive. A lot of what we hear is that, well, everybody drives in this community. That's why our streets are made for cars and there aren't very many transportation options, or why we don't have a transit system. Through our research and what we've heard is that there's actually non-drivers in all communities. We know that there's so many people out there that cannot drive. and they're living their day to day in all of these different communities. So we want to hear from them. We want to hear what their stories are like. And so that's kind of where that came out of. Our big focus is the involuntary non driver, and it is a piece of reflection because even though we call it a week without driving challenge, because we are challenging people to step into the shoes of people that face these barriers and challenges every day, we also want people to know that there's not really a way to fail the challenge. We know that sometimes because you haven't been living your life like this, you probably don't know all of the options around you or how to get around. Maybe you have a doctor's appointment, or maybe you have to take your kids to a school program and you just don't know how to get there or you're going to do it. So you drive. But we just want people to reflect on that moment and think there are people like Anna Zibarts, who is a mother and cannot drive, and she has to figure that out for herself and for her child when she's trying to do those things. And there's a lot of people like that across our community. That reflection piece is a huge part of the week without driving. We definitely want people to not focus so much on, oh, I failed, or I drove, but more on the fact that they should take a moment to consider how other people deal with those, whether maybe they have to call rideshare, but that costs money. And so how many times can you do it? Things like that. It just kind of that reflection piece is really important for us. We do try to give people as many tools as possible to make the challenge successful for them. At the end of the challenge, we like to hear these different reflections and things that surprise people, like what they learned about their community. And like you said, there's a part of it that we know that people enjoy. One of our questions is also, what did you enjoy about the week without driving? Did you find yourself having a good time, sometimes choosing not to drive? Because we know that is also part of the challenge. Our challenge is similar to what you describe, but we definitely do focus on that reflection piece very strongly.
So our focus is probably less on the reflection piece. And now I've thought maybe I need to include that a little bit more. We have an app here called Snap Send Solve, which all the councils use in Australia and New Zealand. And you can report broken infrastructure through that. And so people will walk around the neighborhood and take photographs of maybe a burnt out car or an abandoned trolley or trash or graffiti or a broken footpath or a pothole or something like that. And they can actually get that fixed and repaired as part of it. So that's what we're going to do as well. It started in Washington State, is that correct?
Yeah, exactly.
And then it's grown to across the whole of the US?
Last year, we were able to get decision makers and individuals in 41 states and Washington, D.C. This year, our second year, it hasn't happened yet because it's in September 30th through October 6th. So far, we've gotten 43 states, and we're hoping to get decision makers in all 50 states and Washington, D.C. And there are some people from Canada that are learning how to organize around this as well. And so we're hoping they're able to get the tools also necessary to do their own week without driving, if not this year, next year.
It's an interesting process because one of the challenges that I've had is how can I get people to participate and engage, how to get decision makers to be interested. I have found that sometimes I drive and you're highlighting what we're doing wrong and not what we're doing right. So how do you work with that? We do have our local state representative. He's really come on board and that's wonderful. How can we get the week without driving more engagement?
Yeah, so this is definitely something that a lot of different organizations have faced. We know that getting decision makers to participate can sometimes be hard because we know that one, that they may have a lot of different things that they're doing or going to on a daily basis. We also have heard parents have a specifically challenging time. Obviously, getting kids to places, one of the ways that most people do it in the US is through driving their kids places. But one thing that we do talk about a lot is that because about a third of Americans don't drive, that is a sizable part of their constituency that actually needs these different transportation options. And because there are so many people, and these people tend to come from vulnerable communities, or they tend to be from communities that we sometimes forget. So people with disabilities or older adults who've aged out of driving. Here in the US, we have a specific statistic that says that most people live 7 to 10 years beyond their driving age. So they age out of driving. And so that transition for older people sometimes means that they prefer to live in more walkable areas because they can transition into not driving very much more easily. But not all communities are like that. And if people want to age in place, right, age in the community that they have lived in maybe a majority of their adult life, we want to make sure that those communities are set up to also serve them and serve their needs. And we also know that there is a lot of young people who don't drive. I don't know what the statistics are in Australia, but in the US, there has been a trend of younger people choosing not to get their driver's license at 16 and waiting longer to get their driver's license. In 1997, I believe it was 90% of 16-year-olds had their driver's license. In 2020, I believe it went down to 20%. So it's been a big decrease in 30 years that young people have decided. And this is because of a variety of reasons. Young people also need ways to get around. Your parents can't drive you everywhere all the time. And it also comes with a sense of independence. And so we have these different groups, like very young people, older adults that are driving, and we need to serve their needs as well. And the other thing that we talk about often is that in communities, especially in very suburban communities in the US, most people do have cars in their driveways, but there are a lot of people that are outside of that community that are coming into that community to work because they're either service workers or they are caretakers for a family member in that community. And many of those people tend to be low income and they tend to not have cars. So we know that in the non-driving group in the US, low income people are less likely to own a car. And so because of all of these things, even if in your community you think everybody drives or most people are driving, there are people that need to come into the community that may not have an option to drive. So you're kind of keeping people that you may need to be in those positions and those jobs, and you're keeping them out. And so that is something that I think people often don't think about. So we want to make sure that it is something that decision makers know. There's always going to be people in communities that cannot drive, and they should have the option and the ability to access their communities without the use of a vehicle.
So we have two goals, and one of them is that all school children should have the possibility in urban areas to ride to school on streets that are safe, and also during the school holidays, the school vacation, and all young adults being able to get to work or study without having to get a car or be driven, so they don't start their adult life with car loan debt. There are two goals. So what you're saying is exactly that. We haven't focused so much on the seniors, but it is definitely a big issue when people who have been really independent and they suddenly go, oh, well, I'll always drive. And now I start going, how many more years do you have left of your license? And they go 5 or 6. And I said, okay, so what are you going to do after that? Actually, it sort of shocks them awake a little bit. I think what you're really highlighting is some fantastic stuff about the number of people who are affected. And we can think that because we see cars everywhere, that there are only cars, but that's the way that we've designed our places so that all you see is cars. But I spend quite a bit of time in my front garden in the mornings. I've actually made quite a few friends from people who can't drive, who walk past our place. Maybe they do drive, but they also just like to go for a morning stroll. A lot of people don't want to drive, as you said, and a lot of people can't drive. And that's not for any reason that they're bad or they're wrong. It's just that their personal circumstances have led them to have that situation. And of course, anyone under 17 just can't drive anyway. I don't know if it's the case in the US, but in Australia, to get a driver's license is really expensive. It takes a lot of time. You have to do a lot of hours of training, which wasn't the case when I was that age. So we're heading up towards the end here. What I was wondering is, okay, so I have a friend and she's got two small kids, and sometimes she gets a little bit of freedom. The kids go to daycare a couple of days a week, and that's it. That's all she's got. She couldn't do a week without driving because she's in a really car dependent area. So the minute she leaves her little area, she has to absolutely get in the car, and there's no one to drive her. That's just the reality of her life. What do you think that would be good for her to be able to maybe participate in some way? Also, what could you suggest for her to be able to know where the places are to walk, or what could she do to increase the places that she could walk to or understand more where she could go? What do you suggest?
I think there's a lot of people that find themselves in that situation, right? Because I think that we've learned that people love living in walkable areas. And when they are pushed to maybe places where they know they need to drive, thinking, oh, I'd like to enjoy more places like that. Some people join local advocacy groups that are working towards bettering their sidewalks, streets, walkable areas, also biking, safer streets, and public transit. In the US, we call them bike walk roll groups, and these groups tend to focus on that notion that you talked about. We also know that there's a lot of organizations that are working towards bettering streets. I don't know if Vision Zero is popular in Australia, but here in the US, Vision Zero is a goal that we have that we will eliminate all deadly car crashes by a certain year. And most cities here have a Vision Zero act or policy in place that their government is working towards. A lot of those groups also involve members of the public, whether it be sharing their own stories and getting their voice out of why this is important to them. A lot of times it's because they have children and they want to make sure that their children live in safe areas where they can play and get around or they can walk to school. There's also different groups that focus more on the policy or advocacy side where they talk to decision makers and they share their story as well. Maybe some people have been impacted by a car crash. Sharing that story is really impactful for the decision maker to hear. People get involved in those type of community groups as well. We also know that there's local walking groups that people walk in a group either for social interaction or added mobility, just to enjoy not having to drive and being in a community setting. There's community groups all over the place as well. These different places that you can go to and find in your community. If your community is small and you don't have that, you can go to a local bike shop, and sometimes local bike shops know of different places and maybe they have community bike rides or they teach children about safe cycling in the city. Almost every community that I have seen has some form of that because as we are learning more about the ways that humans like to live, we know we like to live in places where we can connect and easily access each other, our grocery stores, or places that we need. If you can find some group like that, you'll find people who you can have really great conversations with, and maybe you'll find yourself working towards some of that in your own community.
Just a couple of things because our listener is in Australia. We have Queensland Walks. I guess America Walks, a similar kind of advocacy organization, and they do really good work. They have an app so you can find out how walkable your street is and a number of different things. And I encourage people to look on our website, Get Around Cabo Car Free, and go to the tools resources page. I've got a number of things listed there on that page. So that's a place where people can go. I love the idea. Just go on to a Facebook community group and reach out and see what's there, the library and also the bike shops. And that never even occurred to me that that would be a place where people could go. So that's great. We're sort of going to close out in a minute, but before we do, I just want to check in. Is there anything else that you would like to add before we go? Anything else you would like to share?
I'm really excited to be part of this work, and it's really exciting to hear what other places, especially outside of the US, what they're doing, because I think we have so much in common across the world. And when I hear of these different movements and these different groups who are also working on similar things, it's really great to connect. And so I'm excited that through something like this, we have found different things that we share and we like talking about. And we hope that we see our communities in that way, right? Connected and accessible and great places to live. So I thank you for having me. It's been really great talking to you.
It's been such an interesting conversation because I didn't know much about America Walks. I knew a little bit about Week Without Driving, but not so much. And I just think what you're doing is fantastic because everybody wants to walk a little bit more. We're all a little bit heavier than we want. We want to feel like we have freedom, but we do have this urban environment, which is a little bit constrictive distracting and hinders that a little bit. Everybody, you doing that here, me doing this here, Queensland Walks doing that there, Queensland Bikes doing that over there, and all these other places, Canada and the UK, everywhere. It's this huge, great big network. And you can think, oh, nothing's happening and nothing changed. But as you said, it started in 2021 and we started 2 years ago. You just start and then you just see what's possible. That's it. So thank you very much. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I've had fun. I've learnt tons. I just think what you're doing is fantastic. And thank you for stepping into the space of taking what it is that your own lived experience and reflection and training, and then applying that into something that is beyond just your own individual need, but actually looking at it from a broader perspective. So thank you very much for your own personal involvement in that.